The rust yard stretched before Kale like a metallic sea, waves of discarded machinery rising and falling across the uneven terrain. 50 years into the future, the sprawling industrial metropolis of Neo-Viridia had abandoned this place, leaving it a graveyard of broken dreams and forgotten technology. A light drizzle fell from the polluted sky, droplets catching on Kale's weathered jacket as he navigated the familiar pathways between towering piles of scrap. At 40, Kale's once promising career as a space engineer was long behind him. These days, he was just another scavenger, picking through the remains of civilization to survive. Today's goal was simple: find enough salvageable parts to repair an old water purifier. If he succeeded, it might be worth a few credits at the trading post on the edge of the industrial zone. The silence of the junkyard suited him. After years of solitude, Kale had grown accustomed to the quiet company of rusted metal and broken circuits. He had found a peculiar peace here, away from the gleaming towers of Neo-Viridia, where the privileged few lived in technological splendor while the rest scraped by in the shadows. A glint of something unusual caught his eye, a piece of hull plating from what appeared to be an old transport vessel. Kale approached carefully, his experienced gaze assessing the potential value. The plating was unusual, made of an alloy he didn't immediately recognize. That alone made it worth investigating. As he began to shift aside the debris covering the hull fragment, a faint sound reached his ears, so soft he almost believed he'd imagined it. Kale paused, head tilted, listening intently. There it was again, a weak moan, barely audible above the gentle patter of rain. Following the sound, Kale dug deeper into the pile, pushing aside jagged pieces of metal with gloved hands. His heart rate quickened as the moaning grew slightly louder. Someone, or something, was trapped beneath the debris. "Hello," he called out, voice rough from disuse. "Is anyone there?" No response came except another pained whimper. Kale worked faster, tossing aside rusted pipes and twisted frames until his flashlight illuminated something that made him freeze in place. Nestled in a small cavity within the wreckage lay a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. At first glance, it resembled a young girl, perhaps in her early teens, but the similarities to a human ended there. Faint silver scales covered portions of her thin body, shimmering weakly in the beam of his light. A small tail curled around her legs, and two delicate horns protruded from a tangled mass of deep blue hair. Her body was covered in wounds and bruises, some fresh, others partially healed. She was clearly suffering from severe malnutrition, her scaled skin stretched tight over visible ribs. Beside her lay a strange piece of metal with unfamiliar symbols etched into its surface. Kale's first instinct was to retreat. Whatever this was, it spelled trouble, and trouble was something he had spent years avoiding. The authorities would be interested in a discovery like this, perhaps even Neo-Viridia's corporate security forces. Getting involved would shatter the careful isolation he had built. But as he looked at the creature's face, twisted in pain, yet somehow still innocent, something long dormant stirred within him. Once, he had been someone who cared, someone who helped. Before the incident that drove him from society, before he became just another ghost haunting the city's edges. The creature's eyes fluttered open briefly, startling violet irises with vertical pupils that contracted in the flashlight's beam. They fixed on Kale for just a moment before closing again, too weak to stay conscious. "Damn it," Kale muttered, already knowing he couldn't walk away. Whatever she was dying. And he wasn't so far gone that he could leave a child, even one not fully human, to perish alone in the cold rain. With careful movements, he assessed her condition. Multiple lacerations, possible internal injuries, severe dehydration, and starvation. She needed immediate help, but taking her to a medical facility was out of the question. They'd treat her as a specimen, not a patient. Decision made, Kale gently wrapped his jacket around the small figure and lifted her from the debris. She weighed almost nothing, her body burning with an unnatural fever. The strange metal artifact he tucked into his pocket, it seemed important somehow. "Hang on," he whispered, unsure if she could hear him. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." as raindrops mingled with the tears he didn't realize were falling. Cale carried his fragile burden through the labyrinth of the rust yard toward the abandoned train car he called home, each step carrying him further from his solitary existence and toward an uncertain future that would change them both forever. Cale's shelter was a repurposed old train car, partially buried beneath other debris and carefully reinforced, to create a hidden, secure space. Inside, it was Spartan but organized, a survivor's dwelling with storage compartments for salvaged goods, a rudimentary kitchen area, and a small corner with a bedroll. With utmost care, he laid the dragon-like girl on his own bed. In the better light of his shelter, her condition appeared even more dire. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, her silver scales dull where they should have gleamed. Wherever she had come from, whatever she was, she had suffered greatly. Cale worked methodically, drawing on long and used first aid training. He cleaned her wounds with his limited medical supplies, applying antiseptic to the cuts and binding the deeper lacerations. He prepared a simple nutrient solution, normally used to extend his own rations during lean times, and carefully administered it drop by drop in her mouth. Throughout the night, he maintained his vigil, monitoring her fever and ensuring she remained hydrated. Occasionally, her body would shudder violently, and the scales along her arms would emit a faint blue luminescence that faded just as quickly as it appeared. By morning, Cale was exhausted but encouraged. Her breathing had stabilized somewhat, and her body temperature, while still unnaturally high by human standards, seemed to have regulated. He studied her features in the dim light filtering through the small reinforced windows of his shelter. Despite the alien characteristics, the horns, scales, and tail, there was something undeniably humanoid about her. Her face held an expression of vulnerability that transcended species. As he prepared another batch of nutrient solution, her eyes suddenly fluttered open. Violet irises, bright despite her weakened state, fixed on him with a mix of fear and confusion. She tried to move, but lacked the strength, a small whimper escaping her lips. "It's okay," Cale said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe here. I found you in the junkyard. You were hurt." He pointed to her bandaged wounds, then to himself. "I'm trying to help you." The girl's eyes widened slightly, but she showed no sign of understanding his words. She made a series of soft clicking sounds followed by what might have been words in an unknown language. Communication would be difficult, Cale realized. He tried again, this time using simple gestures along with his words. He mimicked drinking, then held the container of nutrient solution toward her. After a moment's hesitation, she seemed to comprehend. When he helped her sit up slightly and brought the liquid to her lips, she drank eagerly, though weakly. It was a small victory, but Cale felt a surge of relief. "That's it," he encouraged. "Small sips." Over the next few days, Cale established a routine. He would venture out briefly to scavenge necessary supplies, never straying far from his shelter, then return to care for his unexpected guest. The girl, he had begun to think of her as Lyra, though he couldn't have explained why the name came to him, grew marginally stronger each day. Her wounds healed with surprising speed, new scales forming over injuries that would have taken weeks to mend in a human. She began to respond to his presence, watching him intently as he moved around the small space. Though they still couldn't communicate verbally, a tentative trust was forming. One evening, as Cale sorted through the day's salvage, he noticed Lyra staring at the strange metal artifact he had found beside her. It was the first time she had shown interest in anything beyond immediate survival needs. "This was with you," he said, retrieving it from where he had stored it. "Do you recognize it?" He placed the metal piece in her hands, and the effect was immediate. The scales on her fingers illuminated with a bright blue glow, and a visible shudder passed through her body. The symbols on the metal responded in kind, glowing with the same hue. Cale watched in fascination as Lyra traced the patterns with trembling fingers, making soft sounds that might have been words in her language. Tears formed in her violet eyes, trailing down her cheeks and falling onto the metal surface. Before he could react, the artifact projected a flickering holographic image, a star system unlike any Kale recognized, with strange configurations and a symbol that resembled a stylized dragon curving through the stars. "What are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Where did you come from?" The hologram faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the shelter in semi-darkness once more. Lyra clutched the metal piece to her chest, her scales still glowing faintly. She looked at Kale with an expression he couldn't fully interpret. Sorrow mingled with something like recognition. That night, as Lyra finally drifted into sleep, Kale sat awake, contemplating the implications of what he had witnessed. The technology of the artifact was beyond anything used in Neo-Viridia. The girl's physiology was entirely unknown. Whatever he had stumbled upon in the rust yard was far more significant than he had initially realized. Outside his shelter, unbeknownst to Kale, whispers were beginning to spread through the underworld of Neo-Viridia. Stories of strange lights seen in the rust yard. Rumors of an unusual creature. Information that would eventually reach ears keen to exploit such discoveries, no matter the cost. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. Kale returned from a scavenging run to find Lyra agitated, her scales flickering with nervous energy. She made urgent gestures toward the door, then hid herself in the corner of the shelter. "What's wrong?" Kale asked, setting down his bag of salvage parts. The answer came in the form of footsteps crunching on debris outside. Deliberate, searching footsteps that did not belong to the casual scavenger. Someone was looking for something specific. Kale moved silently to the small viewpoint he had installed, peering out cautiously. A lean, sharp-featured man was picking his way through the junkyard, accompanied by 2 rough-looking companions. The leader's calculating gaze swept methodically across the terrain. Silas, a notorious information broker known for selling secrets to the highest bidder, regardless of consequences. Kale had crossed paths with him years ago and knew his reputation for ruthlessness. "Stay quiet," Kale whispered to Lyra, who seemed to understand the gravity of the situation even without comprehending his words. Her scales had dimmed to near invisibility, an apparent defense mechanism. For over an hour, they remained in tense silence as Silas and his men searched the surrounding area. They came close to the shelter twice, but Kale's careful camouflage work held. Eventually, the footsteps receded, but Kale knew this was only a temporary reprieve. If Silas was investigating the rumors, others would follow. That night, Kale made a decision. They couldn't stay in the rust yard. His peaceful existence was over the moment he chose to save Lyra. Now he needed to protect her, not just from immediate danger, but from whoever or whatever had left her injured and abandoned. "We need to leave," he told Lyra, using gestures to convey his meaning. "It's not safe here anymore." Though they still lacked a common language, Lyra had begun to pick up a few words and understood simple gestures. She nodded solemnly, her violet eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her apparent age. Kale packed only essentials: medical supplies, food rations, tools, and a few personal items. As he prepared, he noticed Lyra watching him intently, mimicking his careful movements as she attempted to help. Despite the dire circumstances, he found himself smiling slightly. In just a short time, the alien girl had awakened something in him he thought long dead, a sense of purpose, of connection. By dawn, they were ready. Kale had mapped a route through the less trafficked sections of Neo-Viridia's outer zones. He didn't have a clear destination in mind yet, just the certainty that they needed to put distance between themselves and anyone searching for Lyra. As they prepared to leave the shelter that had been his home for years, Lyra surprised him. She approached hesitantly, then reached out to touch his hand. A soft blue glow emanated from her fingertips, warming his skin. "Kale," she said clearly, the first human word she had spoken. She touched her own chest. Lyra. The names were awkward on her tongue, but unmistakable. Stunned, Kale nodded. "Yes, Kale and Lyra." A small smile curved her lips, revealing slightly pointed teeth. Then she gestured toward the door, her expression turning serious again. She understood they needed to go. Together, They slipped into the early morning fog that shrouded the rust yard. Two fugitives from different worlds, bound by circumstances neither could have foreseen. For 3 days, Kale and Lyra navigated the outskirts of Neo-Viridia, moving through abandoned industrial zones and neglected infrastructure. Kale was surprised by Lyra's resilience. Though still recovering from her injuries, she kept pace with determined steps, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Communication remained limited but improving. Lyra proved to be a quick learner, picking up new words each day and attempting to use them. Kale found himself automatically slowing his speech, using simpler phrases and accompanying his words with gestures. In return, she occasionally made sounds in her own language, melodic, with clicking consonants unlike anything in human speech. On the 4th day, as they sheltered in an abandoned maintenance tunnel, the distant sound of engines broke the silence. Kale tensed, instinctively moving to shield Lyra. "Stay back," he whispered. But Lyra was already alert, her scales brightening with what Kale had come to recognize as fear or stress. She clutched the metal artifact, which she kept always on her person, and made urgent sounds, pointing toward the tunnel's far end. Before Kale could respond, the grinding of heavy vehicles grew louder. Powerful lights swept across the tunnel entrance, accompanied by the sound of boots hitting the ground. Many boots, moving with military precision. Thermal signatures confirmed, a voice called out. 2 targets approximately 50 meters inside. Kale's blood ran cold. They'd been found, and not by Silas or common bounty hunters. This was something far more organized and well-equipped. "We need to run," he told Lyra, grabbing their meager possessions. Now, they fled deeper into the tunnel network, Kale navigating by memory and instinct through the labyrinthine passages. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew. Voices calling out coordinates, the clatter of weapons, the steady advance of trained operatives. Subject is moving deeper into Sector 7. A cold, authoritative voice echoed through the tunnels. "Deploy containment protocols. Remember, we need the specimen alive and minimally damaged." Specimen. The word sent a surge of anger through Kale. That's all Lyra was to them. A thing to be studied, not a living being deserving of dignity. As they rounded a corner into a larger chamber filled with old machinery, Kale realized they were running out of options. The chamber had only 2 exits, the way they had come and another tunnel that led toward the city proper. They were being herded. "Lyra," he said urgently, kneeling to meet her eyes. "We're trapped. I'll distract them. When I do, you run. That tunnel leads toward the city. Hide in the crowds." She shook her head vehemently, gripping his arm. "No. Kale, stay. Lyra, stay. You don't understand. These people, they want to hurt you, to use you." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Flashlight beams swept the entrance to the chamber. They had seconds, not minutes. "Please," Kale begged. "You have to." His words died as Lyra stepped away from him, her expression shifting from fear to something more primal. The scales across her body began to glow brightly, no longer the soft blue of before, but an intense white-hot brilliance. The temperature around her rose dramatically. "Stand down and surrender the specimen." A tall, imposing figure entered the chamber, flanked by soldiers in advanced tactical gear. The insignia on their uniforms depicted a stylized shield, the logo of Aegis Corp, one of Neo-Viridia's most powerful technology conglomerates, known for their secretive research divisions. The leader's cold eyes assessed the situation clinically. "This doesn't have to be difficult. Hand over the alien, and you can walk away." Kale moved to stand between Lyra and the soldiers. "She's not a specimen," he said. "She's alive. Sentient. You have no rights." The man gave a humorless laugh. "I am Commander Varkos of Aegis Special Operations. That creature is the property of Aegis Corp, the last known member of species we've been studying for decades. It represents billions in research investment and potential military applications." "She's a child," Kale protested. "It is a weapon," Varkos corrected coldly. "One that escaped containment during transport. Now, step aside, or be removed. The soldiers raised their weapons, sleek, non-lethal capture devices designed to incapacitate without killing. Kale knew he stood no chance against their advanced technology, but he held his ground nonetheless. "You'll have to go through me," he said quietly. Varkos sighed. "If you insist." He gave a small hand signal to his men. What happened next occurred so quickly that Kale barely registered the sequence of events. As the soldiers advanced, Lyra let out a high-pitched keening sound. The glow from her scales intensified to blinding proportions, and the temperature in the chamber spiked dramatically. With a gesture that seemed almost instinctual, she thrust her hands forward. A concentrated wave of thermal energy erupted from her palms, striking the lead soldiers and sending them flying backward. Equipment melted, and the concrete floor beneath her feet began to soften from the intense heat. The remaining soldiers opened fire with their stun weapons, but the energy pulses seemed to dissipate harmlessly against Lyra's luminous scales. Her eyes, now glowing like miniature suns, fixed on Varkos with unmistakable recognition and hatred. "Full containment," Varkos shouted, backing toward the exit. "Suppress it now." But Lyra wasn't finished. With another gesture, she sent a wave of heat toward the ceiling, causing the aged concrete to crack and collapse between them and their pursuers. Dust and debris filled the air, providing momentary cover. In the chaos, she grabbed Kale's hand. Her touch was burning hot, yet somehow it didn't harm him. "Run," she said clearly, pulling him toward the second tunnel. Too stunned to argue, Kale followed. Behind them, he could hear Varkos shouting orders, but the collapsed section of ceiling had bought them precious time. They emerged from the tunnel network into a neglected industrial district on the periphery of Neo-Viridia proper. Rain had begun to fall, hissing into steam where it touched Lyra's still glowing scales. Gradually, the brilliant light faded, and she returned to her normal appearance, though she seemed drained by the effort. "Lyra," Kale said when they had put sufficient distance between themselves and the tunnel exit. "What was that? What did you do back there?" She looked at her hands, then at him, her expression troubled. In halting words mixed with gestures, she tried to explain. "Lyra, protect Kale. Bad people. Hurt before. Not go back. Those men, Aegis Corp, they had you before? They hurt you." She nodded, touching some of her healing wounds. "Tests. Pain." She pointed to her head. "Take memories." The implications were horrifying. Aegis Corp, one of the most prestigious companies in Neo-Viridia, had been experimenting on a sentient being, a child by all appearances. "I won't let them take you back," Kale promised, his resolve hardening. "But we need to find somewhere safe. Somewhere far from here." Lyra tilted her head thoughtfully, then reached for the metal artifact she carried. She held it up, pointing to the symbols. "Home," she said simply, and she pointed to the sky. "Stars." For the first time, Kale truly understood what he was dealing with. Lyra wasn't just some unknown terrestrial species. She was extraterrestrial. The revelation should have terrified him, but instead, it only strengthened his determination to protect her. "We'll find a way," he said, though he had no idea how to fulfill such a promise. "But first, we need to get out of Neo-Viridia. Aegis has too much influence here." They continued through the rain, two fugitives against a powerful enemy, each step taking them further from safety, yet somehow bringing them closer together through the unspoken bond of shared danger and growing trust. In the days that followed their escape from Aegis Corp's forces, Kale came to a realization. They couldn't outrun or outfight an enemy with such vast resources. They needed information, understanding, and possibly allies. As they moved from one temporary shelter to another in the sprawling outskirts of Neo-Viridia, Kale began teaching Lyra more systematically. Her capacity to learn was astonishing. Within a week, she could form simple sentences and understand most of what he said. In return, she attempted to share knowledge of her own species and origins, though limited by language barriers. Through a combination of words, drawings, and the holographic projections occasionally emitted by her artifact, which she called a keystone, Kale pieced together fragments of an incredible story. Lyra's people, which she called something that sounded like Stellari Draken, but which Kale mentally translated as Star Dragons, were an ancient spacefaring race with the ability to manipulate energy, particularly thermal energy. They had visited Earth in the distant past, perhaps giving rise to dragon myths in various cultures. According to Lyra, her kind had nearly been wiped out by an unspecified catastrophe. The survivors scattered across the stars, hiding their advanced technology and knowledge. Lyra herself had been part of a small group heading to a sanctuary world when their ship was detected and shot down by Earth forces, specifically Aegis Corp vessels. The survivors, including Lyra's caretakers, had been captured for study. Lyra had eventually managed to escape during a transfer between facilities, but she was wounded and weakened, ultimately collapsing in the rust yard where Kale found her. "They want Keystone," Lyra explained one evening, holding the artifact protectively. "As knowledge, power, maps to home." Kale understood the implications. Aegis Corp wasn't just interested in Lyra's biological abilities. They wanted the technological and scientific knowledge of an advanced civilization, possibly including weapons technology and faster-than-light travel. "We need help," he concluded. "Someone who knows more about this, who might understand your keystone or know what Aegis is planning." That's when he remembered the stories, tales whispered among the outcasts and scavengers about an entity known as the Oracle of Shattered Peaks. According to legend, the Oracle possessed knowledge from the stars and beyond, preserved from before the great technological collapse that had preceded Neo-Viridia's rise. Some said the Oracle was an ancient AI. Others claimed it was a long-lived human who had merged with technology. Regardless of its nature, if anyone could help them understand Lyra's keystone and provide guidance against Aegis Corp, it would be the Oracle. The decision made, they began preparations for a dangerous journey. Shattered Peaks lay far from Neo-Viridia, in a region rendered nearly uninhabitable by magnetic storms and treacherous terrain. The route would take them through territories controlled by scavenger gangs, past Aegis Corp outposts, and finally into the magnetic wilderness itself. Before they could depart, however, they needed supplies and better information. Kale reluctantly decided to risk contact with an old acquaintance, a mechanic named Reza who operated a repair shop in the semi-legitimate markets on Neo-Viridia's edge. If anyone had information about Aegis Corp's movements and weaknesses, it would be Reza. Their visit to Reza's cluttered workshop nearly ended in disaster. The mechanic, initially welcoming, became visibly nervous upon seeing Lyra, despite the hooded cloak Kale had her wear. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, Kale," Reza whispered urgently. "Aegis has put out a bounty big enough to buy a luxury apartment in the upper spire. They're saying you kidnapped valuable corporate property, some kind of experimental biosynthetic." "She's not property," Kale said firmly. "She's alive, sentient. They were experimenting on her." Reza glanced at Lyra, who had been examining the workshop's various mechanical curiosities with evident fascination. "What is she, really?" "Not from here," Kale replied simply. "And in danger. I need transport towards Shattered Peaks and information about Aegis patrol routes." Reza looked as though he might refuse, but something in Kale's expression, or perhaps the sight of Lyra's obvious intelligence and childlike wonder, swayed him. "I can get you a modified hover sled with decent range," he said finally, "and some outdated patrol schedules. But after that, we're even. I never saw you, never helped you." Kale nodded gratefully. "Fair enough." As Reza gathered the promised items, alarms suddenly blared throughout the market district. Through the grimy windows, Kale could see Aegis security forces methodically making their way from shop to shop. "They're doing a sweep," Reza hissed. "You need to go now." Kale grabbed Lyra, who had already sensed the danger, her scales flickering with nervous energy beneath her cloak. Reza pointed them toward a back exit. "The hover sled is in the alley, charged and ready. Go northeast, stay off the main routes." And Kale, he added as they headed for the door, "Whatever she is, whatever she knows, be careful. Power like that changes people." With a grim nod of acknowledgement, Kale led Lyra through the exit and into the narrow alley where the promised vehicle waited, a battered but serviceable hover sled designed for rough terrain. They departed just as Aegis forces entered Rey's shop, the sound of authoritative voices demanding information fading behind them as they accelerated toward the city limits and the wilderness beyond. The journey to Shattered Peaks proved even more perilous than anticipated. The hover sled, while faster than traveling on foot, could only avoid Aegis detection systems for so long. Twice they narrowly escaped patrols, hiding the vehicle and themselves in rocky outcroppings or dense foliage until the danger passed. As they ventured further from Neo-Viridia, the landscape became increasingly hostile. The magnetic storms that gave Shattered Peaks its fearsome reputation intensified, disrupting the hover sled's navigation systems and occasionally causing power fluctuations. During one particularly violent storm, they were forced to take shelter in a cave as lightning of unnatural colors streaked across the sky and metallic debris was lifted and hurled by powerful electromagnetic forces. "Not safe," Lyra observed, watching the chaos outside. Her vocabulary had continued to expand rapidly during their journey. "No," Kale agreed, working to stabilize their power reserves. "But sometimes the most dangerous path is the safest from pursuit. Aegis doesn't patrol this region heavily because of the storms." Lyra nodded thoughtfully, then surprised it by adding, "Like home, storms protect sanctuary. Your people used magnetic storms as protection too?" She nodded again. "Natural defense. We enhance." She made a gesture with her hand, mimicking manipulation. "Your species can control magnetic fields?" Kale asked, fascinated despite their precarious situation. "Some can. Not Lyra. I am." She frowned, searching for the word. "Young. Learning still." The conversation confirmed what Kale had begun to suspect. Lyra wasn't just a refugee, but possibly a child of significant importance among her people. Why else would she have been traveling with a keystone containing valuable knowledge? After the storm subsided, they continued their journey, the terrain growing increasingly sheer and broken. The region earned its name from the jagged mountain peaks that appeared to have been shattered by some ancient cataclysm, creating a labyrinth of narrow passes and treacherous cliffs. Navigation became a constant challenge, with the hover sled systems providing only intermittent guidance. Kale relied increasingly on instinct and the vague directions from old stories about the oracles. Location. It was Lyra who ultimately sensed they were close. As they navigated a particularly narrow ravine, her scales began to glow with a pulsing rhythm, and the keystone responded in kind. "There," she said, pointing to what appeared to be a solid rock face. Hidden. Kale might have dismissed her claim, but by now, he had learned to trust Lyra's perceptions. Approaching the wall, he detected a faint current of air emanating from seemingly solid stone. An illusion, he wondered aloud. Or some kind of holographic projection? Lyra stepped forward confidently, extending her hand until it disappeared into the rock face. She turned to Kale with an expression that, despite her alien features, he recognized as a smile. "Come," she said, taking his hand. "Oracle waits." Together, they stepped through the illusory barrier and into a hidden valley unlike anything Kale could have imagined. Ancient structures blended seamlessly with the natural landscape, their design unlike any human architecture. At the center stood a temple-like building constructed of a material that seemed to shift colors with the changing light. As they approached, the doors of the temple opened silently. A figure emerged, neither human nor like Lyra, but something else entirely. Tall and slender, with crystalline features and eyes that contained galaxies of light, the being regarded them with ancient wisdom. "The last Stellari and the human who defied fate," it said in a voice that seemed to bypass their ears and speak directly to their minds. "I have been expecting you." Kale stood speechless, but Lyra stepped forward, holding out the keystone with reverence. "Oracle," she said, "need help, need truth." The being extended a crystalline hand, not touching the keystone, but hovering above it. "The truth is both simpler and more terrible than you know, young Stellari. Come inside. Time grows short, and your pursuers draw near." Inside the temple, the oracle revealed secrets that shook Kale to his core. "Aegis Corp," it explained, had not merely stumbled upon Lyra's ship by chance. They had been searching for the Stellari for decades, guided by fragments of ancient technology recovered from previous encounters. The one called Varkos leads a division within Aegis dedicated to weapons of unimaginable power, the Oracle said. He believes the Stellari Keystone contains the location of an artifact your people sealed away eons ago, what you would call a star killer, capable of destabilizing a sun and harnessing the resulting energy. Why would we create such a thing? Lyra asked, distressed. You did not create it, child. Your ancestors contained it, a weapon left by an even older race, one consumed by their own creation. The Stellari became guardians, ensuring such power remained sealed. The Oracle turned to Kale. Aegis Corp has nearly completed their own version of the device, reverse-engineered from fragments. But without the missing components, the equations and coordinates in the Keystone, their creation remains unstable, imperfect. What happens if they succeed? Kale asked, though he dreaded the answer. They believe they will harness unlimited energy, securing dominance over Earth and beyond. In reality, they risk unleashing a chain reaction that could consume this solar system. The gravity of the situation stunned Kale into silence. What had begun as a simple act of compassion, saving a dying girl in a junkyard, had escalated into a struggle with the fate of worlds at stake. There is more, the Oracle continued. The Keystone contains not only warnings, but the method to permanently neutralize the weapon. That is why the Stellari sent their younglings, including Lyra, to Sanctuary, to preserve this knowledge should the Guardians fall. Lyra's eyes widened with newfound understanding. My purpose, she whispered. Before the Oracle could respond, alarm sigils illuminated throughout the temple complex. They have found us, the Oracle announced calmly. Varkos has technologies that even I underestimated. We need to run, Kale said urgently. The Oracle shook its crystalline head. No more running. The time has come to confront. I will help you prepare, but the final stand must be yours. It turned to Lyra. Young Stellari, are you ready to embrace your heritage fully? To become what you were born to be? Lyra looked momentarily frightened, then glanced at Kale. Something in his expression seemed to steady her resolve. She nodded firmly. Yes, show me. What followed was a transformation Kale could scarcely comprehend. The Oracle guided Lyra through an ancient ritual, using the Keystone to unlock abilities dormant within her genetic code. Her form remained primarily humanoid, but her scales grew more pronounced, spreading across her body in patterns of cosmic significance. The small horns on her head elongated slightly, and her eyes took on the same galactic quality as the Oracle's. Most significantly, her connection to thermal and electromagnetic energy intensified exponentially. She could now consciously control the abilities that had previously manifested only in moments of extreme stress. Outside, the sounds of Aegis Corp forces deploying grew louder. Varkos had brought a small army, complete with specialized equipment designed to capture or neutralize Lyra. I must protect the Sanctuary, the Oracle said. The knowledge preserved here must not fall into Aegis' hands. You two must take the fight directly to the source, to Neo Viridia, to Aegis headquarters where their version of the Starkiller nears completion. How? Kale asked. We barely escaped them before. Now we're supposed to infiltrate their most secure facility. The Oracle's expression remained serene. You will not go alone. I have already sent the call. Others who oppose Aegis's dominance will meet you on the path. And you have something they do not expect, a fully awakened Stellari. Lyra stood taller now, confidence replacing her former uncertainty. We will succeed, she said, her voice carrying new harmonics. For the Stellari. For Earth. She looked at Kale. For kindness that saved me. The Oracle led them to a hidden hangar containing a vessel of clearly non-human design. Sleek, organic in appearance, yet unmistakably advanced. This will take you where you need to go, faster than they can follow, it explained. I will create a diversion to cover your departure. As they prepared to board, the Oracle placed a crystalline hand on Kale's shoulder. Human, it said softly, You chose compassion when you found her dying. That choice altered the fate of worlds. Remember this truth when darkness seems overwhelming. Small acts of kindness spark the greatest changes. With those words, they parted. The oracle returned to the temple to face Varkos's forces while Kale and Lyra boarded the alien vessel. Through some form of psychic connection, Lyra interfaced with the ship's controls, activating systems dormant for centuries. As they rose from the hidden valley, they witnessed the oracle's diversion, a magnetic storm of unprecedented magnitude, targeted specifically at Aegis forces. The violence of the electromagnetic disruption would buy them time, though Kale suspected the oracle would pay a heavy price for such an expenditure of power. Their course was set. Neo Viridia, the heart of Aegis Corp's empire, where humanity's arrogance and an ancient weapon threatened to converge with catastrophic consequences. The journey back to Neo Viridia took mere hours in the Stellari vessel, a trip that had taken days on the hoversled. As promised, they encountered allies along the way, a resistance network that had been fighting Aegis Corp's more egregious operations from the shadows. Their new allies provided crucial intelligence. The exact location of the Starkiller prototype within Aegis headquarters, the security protocols in place, and a narrow window of opportunity when the weapon would be most vulnerable during final calibration tests. The plan they devised was dangerously simple. While a diversionary attack drew security forces to another part of the complex, Kale, with his engineering background, would infiltrate the main laboratory with Lyra, where she would use her awakened abilities to neutralize the weapon's core. As they prepared for what might be a suicide mission, Kale and Lyra shared a quiet moment aboard the Stellari vessel. The alien girl, no longer quite so alien to him, studied the skyline of Neo Viridia visible through the view screen. The city's gleaming towers and energy webs created an artificial constellation against the night sky. Beautiful, she observed, but hollow, not like stars. Kale nodded in understanding. Humanity built wonders, but forgot why we wanted them in the first place. Companies like Aegis, they pursue power for its own sake. Not all humans, Lyra said, turning to him with those galaxy-filled eyes. You different. Her simple statement carried such earnest conviction that Kale found himself momentarily speechless. In her eyes, he was somehow better than he believed himself to be, a man who had chosen compassion over indifference, action over apathy. I'm just trying to fix a mistake, he said finally. Aegis is partly my responsibility. Years ago, I worked for their aerospace division before I realized what kind of company they really were. I helped design systems they're probably using right now. Lyra considered this, then placed her scaled hand over his. Past, not important. Now important. Choice important. Her wisdom, deceptively simple yet profound, steadied his resolve. Tomorrow they would face nearly impossible odds, but in this moment, he found an unexpected peace. Dawn brought the beginning of their assault. The resistance forces, though small, executed their diversionary attack with precision, detonating electromagnetic pulse devices at a secondary Aegis facility across the city. As predicted, security forces were rapidly diverted, creating a brief vulnerability in the main complex's defenses. Kale and Lyra, disguised in maintenance worker uniforms, used falsified credentials provided by their allies to enter through a service entrance. Lyra's alien features were partially concealed by specialized makeup and a hooded work jacket, though a close inspection would reveal her true nature. Their progress through the lower levels went smoothly at first. Lyra's enhanced senses allowed them to avoid patrols, and Kale's knowledge of typical Aegis architectural layouts guided their path toward the central laboratories. The first significant obstacle came at a high-security checkpoint requiring biometric authentication. As they hesitated, contemplating their options, an alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility. Security breach detected in sectors 7 through 9. All personnel implement lockdown protocols immediately. That's not for us, Kale realized. The diversion must have been more effective than planned. Or less, Lyra countered, pointing to a security monitor showing resistance members being captured. Trap. Kale's heart sank as he watched their allies being overwhelmed by Aegis forces. The diversion had failed, perhaps had been anticipated. Their own presence would soon be discovered. We abort, he decided quickly. Find another way, another time. But Lyra shook her head firmly. No other time. Weapon nearly ready. She placed her hand against the security door, closing her eyes in concentration. I can open. Before Kale could protest, her scales began to glow with intense energy. She channeled a precise electromagnetic pulse into the security system, not enough to trigger additional alarms, but sufficient to temporarily disable the biometric locks. The door slid open, revealing a short corridor leading to the main laboratory complex. Through reinforced windows, they could see scientists working frantically around a central apparatus, a device that seemed to bend light around it, distorting the very space it occupied. The Star Killer prototype, Kale whispered. They had reached their target, but the security breach elsewhere in the facility had placed everyone on high alert. Scientists and security personnel moved with heightened vigilance, making their planned approach impossible. As they debated their next move from the relative safety of the corridor, a familiar voice froze Kale's blood. Fascinating, isn't it? The culmination of decades of research. They turned to find Commander Varkos standing behind them, immaculately uniformed and flanked by elite security operatives. His cold smile suggested he had been expecting them. Did you really think we wouldn't anticipate your return? He asked conversationally. After your visit to the Oracle? We've been tracking the Stellari vessel since it left Shattered Peaks. Lyra stepped forward, her posture shifting to one of defiance. The changes from the Oracle's ritual became more pronounced as her restraint faltered, scales brightening, eyes glowing with cosmic fire. Varkos seemed unimpressed. Your transformation is remarkable, but ultimately futile. This facility was designed to contain beings far more powerful than a half-grown Stellari. He gestured to his men. Take the human for interrogation. The Stellari comes with me to the primary containment chamber. Her energy signature will be the final component we need to stabilize the prototype. As the security operatives moved to separate them, Kale caught Lyra's eye. Something unspoken passed between them. A plan formed in an instant of shared understanding. Lyra suddenly went limp, her scales dimming as though her energy was depleted. Varkos stepped forward in alarm, concerned his valuable asset was damaged. In that moment of distraction, Kale struck. Years in the rust yard had taught him to fight dirty when necessary. He disabled the nearest operative with a targeted blow to the throat, seizing the man's stun baton in the same motion. Simultaneously, Lyra's apparent weakness revealed itself as a ruse. She erupted with blinding energy, knocking Varkos and the remaining operatives backward with a controlled electromagnetic pulse. Run, Kale shouted, using the stolen baton to short-circuit the corridor's security system. Emergency barriers began to drop randomly, creating chaos. They sprinted toward the main laboratory, where scientists scattered in panic at their approach. The Star Killer prototype pulsed with ominous energy at the center of the room, its activation sequence already initiated. Can you disable it? Kale asked Lyra as they reached the device. She placed her hands on the prototype's housing, her expression concentrated. Complex. Wrong design. Dangerous. Her scales flared as she attempted to interface with the weapon. Need time. Time is exactly what we don't have, Kale muttered, watching as security forces regrouped on the other side of the laboratory's reinforced doors. Varkos directed their efforts, his expression a mask of cold fury. Kale turned to the laboratory's control systems, utilizing his engineering knowledge to erect additional barriers and disable external overrides. Each measure would buy them seconds, perhaps minutes, but against Aegis's resources, they couldn't hold out long. As Lyra worked to neutralize the weapon, Kale made a difficult decision. The prototype's power source, a contained fragment of exotic matter, could be overloaded. The resulting explosion would destroy the weapon and much of the facility, but might claim their lives as well. Lyra, he said quietly, I could destabilize the containment field. It would destroy everything here. She glanced up briefly, understanding the implications immediately. Last option, she responded, returning to her work with renewed intensity. The laboratory doors began to glow red as Aegis forces applied cutting tools from the other side. They had minutes at most. Lyra suddenly straightened, her expression transformed by a moment of clarity. Not destroy, she said. Redirect. Before Kale could ask what she meant, she pressed the keystone against the prototype's control matrix. The artifact interfaced with the weapon, ancient Stellari technology recognizing the principles behind Aegis's corrupted recreation. "What are you doing?" Kale asked, watching in fascination as symbols from the keystone transferred to the weapon's display. "Changing target," Lyra explained, her fingers dancing across controls with newfound certainty. "Not stars. Not planets." She looked up at him, galaxy eyes ablaze with purpose. "Itself." Kale understood. She was reprogramming the weapon to implode rather than explode, to consume itself rather than unleash destruction outward. It was brilliant, but the energy release will still be massive, he warned. "We won't survive if we're here when it happens." "I know," Lyra said simply. "You go. I finish." "No," Kale replied instantly. "I'm not leaving you." The doors began to yield under the assault from outside. Through the widening gap, Varkos's voice carried clearly. "Stop them at all costs. The prototype must be preserved." Lyra continued her work, the keystone now pulsing in harmony with the weapon. "Almost done. Then must contain reaction." She looked at Kale with sudden vulnerability. "Need all my energy to contain. May not survive." Understanding dawned on Kale with terrible clarity. Lyra intended to use her own body as a vessel to contain the weapon's implosion, a living containment field. "There has to be another way," he insisted, desperation edging his voice. "No time," she said gently. "My choice. My purpose." Her expression softened. "You saved me in Junkyard. Now I save you. Save Earth." The doors finally gave way. Varkos and his forces poured into the laboratory, weapons trained on Kale and Lyra. The commander assessed the situation quickly, his eyes widening as he recognized what had been done to his precious weapon. "Stop! You're triggering a chain reaction," he shouted, genuine fear replacing his usual coldness. "Too late," Lyra said, a smile touching her lips as the final sequence activated. She turned to Kale one last time. "Run now. Remember Lyra." With a surge of power that knocked everyone in the room off their feet, Lyra fully embraced her Stellari heritage. Her form shifted, elongating into something more draconic while maintaining her humanoid core. Scales of cosmic fire enveloped her as she wrapped herself around the destabilizing weapon, creating a living cocoon of energy. Varkos and his men fled in terror as the air itself began to distort around Lyra and the prototype. Kale remained frozen, unable to abandon her despite the imminent danger. "Go!" Lyra's voice boomed with harmonic overtones, no longer just a voice but a force of nature. Her transformed eyes met his one final time. "Live." The raw emotion in that single word broke through Kale's paralysis. With a heart shattered by the choice, he ran. He made it to the outer corridors when the implosion began. Unlike a conventional explosion, the event created a vacuum effect, pulling energy and matter inward rather than expelling it outward. The phenomenon, contained and directed by Lyra's sacrifice, focused primarily on the weapon itself and a spherical area around it. The entire Aegis complex shuddered. Power systems failed throughout Neo-Viridia as the implosion created cascading electromagnetic disruptions. Kale, thrown against a wall by the initial shockwave, lost consciousness briefly. When he awoke, the world had changed. Emergency systems bathed the damaged corridors in red light. Evacuation alarms blared throughout the complex. Where the laboratory had been, there was now just a perfectly spherical void, as though a portion of reality itself had been removed. Of Lyra, there was no sign. Dazed and heartbroken, Kale navigated the chaos of the collapsing facility. Aegis personnel fled in all directions, their hierarchy and discipline shattered in the face of the incomprehensible event they had witnessed. Varkos was nowhere to be seen, perhaps consumed in the implosion, perhaps escaped to fight another day. Kale emerged into a Neo-Viridia, transformed by crisis. The city's power grid had failed in multiple sectors. Emergency broadcasts reported an industrial accident at Aegis headquarters, but videos spreading across communication channels told a different story of strange lights, of a draconic figure briefly visible within a sphere of energy. In the days that followed, Aegis Corp's empire began to crumble. The catastrophic failure of their secret weapon, combined with leaked information about their illegal research and extraterrestrial exploitation, triggered investigations at the highest levels. The resistance movement, emboldened by the corporation's vulnerability, released damning evidence of other Aegis atrocities. Kale watched these developments from the shadows, emotionally numb. He had returned to the Rust Yard, to the train car shelter where his journey with Lyra had truly begun. Everything felt hollow without her presence. The purpose she had awakened in him, now overshadowed by grief. 1 month after the implosion, on a night when the stars seemed particularly bright over Neo-Viridia's diminished skyline, Kale sat outside his shelter, gazing upward. The city was changing, power structures shifting as Aegis's influence waned. Some spoke of reforms, of greater regulation of corporate power. Others feared new entities would simply rise to fill the vacuum. Kale cared little for these politics. His thoughts remained with a silver-scaled girl who had trusted him, who had sacrificed everything to save a world not her own. A flicker of movement caught his attention, a brief blue glow among the piles of junk. Dismissing it as a power fluctuation from a discarded battery, he returned to his melancholy stargazing. Then came a sound, a familiar, soft clicking followed by broken syllables. Kyle. He shot to his feet, heart pounding. There, moving unsteadily through the junkyard, was a figure he had thought lost forever. Smaller than before, scales dimmed to a faint silver, but unmistakably Lyra. Kale ran to her, catching her as she stumbled. She felt solid in his arms. Real, not a hallucination or ghost. Ow! He managed, voice breaking with emotion. The implosion. Lyra smiled weakly. Star dragons. Hard to kill. Scattered. Across stars. Put back. Together. Her explanation made little sense, but the reality of her presence overwhelmed any need for understanding. Somehow, whether through stellari physiology or the mysteries of the implosion itself, she had survived, reconstituted from energy to matter once more. She was different, weaker, portions of her memory fragmented, her connection to her powers diminished. The sacrifice had taken a toll, and yet, fundamentally, she remained Lyra, the being who had trusted him, who had shown him purpose again. Came home, she said simply, looking around at the Rust Yard with affection rather than fear. To Kale. He held her tightly, tears flowing freely. Yes, he whispered. Home. In the weeks that followed, Lyra gradually regained strength. Though much of her cosmic power remained dormant or lost, she retained enough of her unique abilities to mark her as something other than human. The keystone had been lost in the implosion, along with much of her people's ancient knowledge, a sacrifice that had saved countless lives. As Neo-Viridia rebuilt itself, perhaps wiser for its brush with catastrophe, Kale and Lyra forged a new existence on society's edges. They established a small repair shop using Kale's engineering skills, providing technology assistance to those the city's elite ignored. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Lyra would gaze at the stars, a wistful expression suggesting memories of her lost people. But when Kale asked if she wished to find a way back to them, her answer was always the same. Found family here, she would say, her vocabulary now fluent, though still carrying melodic alien undertones. With you. They became known in the community as protectors of sorts, the engineer and his unusual adopted daughter, intervening when Aegis remnants or other corporate entities threatened the vulnerable. Rumors spread about the girl with silver scales who could manipulate energy, but most dismissed these as urban legends. Occasionally, they received encrypted messages from resistance contacts, warnings about Aegis factions attempting to rebuild, or tips about other extraterrestrial technology at risk of exploitation. These missions gave purpose to their unique partnership, allowing Lyra to honor her people's legacy as guardians. The Rust Yard, once a place of abandonment and decay, gradually transformed around their small dwelling. Others, drawn to their compassion and protection, established homes nearby, creating an informal community of outcasts and visionaries. With Lyra's guidance, they incorporated sustainable technologies that worked in harmony with natural energies rather than exploiting them. Small echoes of Stellari wisdom. Years passed this way, and Lyra grew into her hybrid existence. Not fully human, not fully the Stellari she might have been, but something unique and wonderful. The Ember Star, once nearly extinguished in a junkyard, now burned steadily, illuminating lives around her with quiet wisdom and compassion. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Kale and Lyra climbed to the highest point in the Rust Yard to watch the sunset. The Neo-Viridia skyline had changed dramatically, less imposing, more integrated with nature, though still imperfect, as all human endeavors remained. "Do you ever regret it?" Kale asked quietly. "Saving us? Staying here?" Lyra considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Her appearance had stabilized over time, still clearly non-human with her delicate horns and silver-scaled skin, but comfortably herself. "Never," she answered finally. One act of kindness started everything. She turned to Kale, galaxy eyes soft with affection. "You found me dying. Chose to save. Small choice, big universe." Kale smiled, recognizing the echo of the Oracle's wisdom in her words. Small acts of kindness spark the greatest changes. "Yes," Lyra agreed, turning back to the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. "And we keep choosing kindness. Every day." Together they watched as the stars emerged fully. The same stars that had witnessed an alien child abandoned in a junkyard and a lonely man who chose compassion over indifference, setting in motion events that would reshape worlds. In the cosmic scale, they were tiny figures, insignificant perhaps, but to each other they were everything. Family forged in fire, bound by choices that had illuminated the darkness of a vast, unspeakably gorgeous universe.